To be extraordinary in the world of technology, ordinary isn't good enough. It takes extra. Extra strategy, extra design, extra engineering. For more than 28 years, ThoughtWorks has been the technology consultancy where extra overcomes ordinary. So if your digital journey needs a partner who will provide the extra, we've got you covered. Because we're all about delivering extraordinary impact together.
Thank you. I want to go ahead and welcome everybody. To CDOIQ. My name is Mark Johnson. Welcome to a great session today. You're on track 1, Environment, Social, and Governance, Better Data Insights Enabling Companies' ESG Goals, and ultimately, the benefit of society. I'm the Regional Vice President for Fusion Alliance. I'm also our Executive Strategic Data Management and Analytics Leader. And I have the great honor and privilege today of producing this particular panel, which may be the one that I'm most interested in of all the discussions we're going to have here today with Randy. Extending CDO Tenure, Lessons from Leading CDOs on Delivering Business Value for Long-Term Success. Randy Bean of NewVantage Partners is our panel moderator today, and we have some great panelists here. I'm going to introduce you, Randy, and I'll let you introduce your panelists. How's that?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Is my mic still? Oh, thank you. So Randy is a noted author, speaker, and thought leader in the field of data-driven business transformation. He's founder and chief executive of NewVantage Partners, a strategic advisory firm which he founded in 2001. Prior to founding NewVantage, Bean was founding executive at Wheelhouse, a Kleiner Perkins-backed CRM firm, chief marketing officer at Veridium, a Northbridge-backed CRM firm, and senior vice president at Hart Hanks Data Technologies, a pioneer in database marketing and CRM, where he was a member of the operating committee during a 10-year tenure. He began his career in IT and strategic planning at the Bank of Boston, now the Bank of America. Bean is a recognized thought leader in the areas of big data, AI, and data-driven business innovation. He's known for his frequent writing in Forbes, Harvard Business Review, MIT Sloan Management Review, and the Wall Street Journal. As a writer and commentator, Bean is known for his observations on business innovation and data ethics. He has written on business and social consequences and impact of big data and artificial intelligence. Bean has been active in civic and philanthropic activities for nearly 3 decades. Oh, you're older than I thought. He was named in 2016 to the National Council Board of the College of Arts at Washington University in St. Louis, and previously served on the university's National Council Board for University Libraries and Special Collections from 2010 to 2016. Bean has since served since 2010 on the board of the James Merrill House and Whittier in residence program at Stonington, Connecticut, where he serves as the program chair for his nationally recognized Writers in Residence program. He also serves the National Technical Advisory Board for Year Up and the 2025 Advisory Board for DataKind, and on the board of directors of the Stonington Historical Society. Bean is the founder and executive director of the Big Data for Social Justice Foundation, a nonprofit foundation established in 2016 with the goal of raising awareness for data-driven social good initiatives. Bean obtained a BA from Washington University in St. Louis in 1978, where he studied literature and history. Bean and his wife Elizabeth Beth Black are the parents of 2 grown sons and currently reside in Boston, Massachusetts. In Stonington, Connecticut, Bean enjoys travel, reading, cultural events, and outdoor activities. Welcome, a round of applause for welcoming Randy Bean and his panelists.
Thank you, Mark, for the kind introduction. I assume everybody can hear me okay. This is really about the panelists. I've been hosting or moderating this event for, I believe, 9 years now. And over that time, participants have included CDOs from firms including American Express, Cigna, CVS Health, Eli Lilly, Morgan Stanley, GE, General Motors, JP Morgan, MasterCard, Prudential, TIAA, USAA, and Walmart. So a very vast and distinguished group of chief data officers. And I'm delighted today to have 4 chief data officers from diverse backgrounds, from diverse industries. Craig Brabeck, chief data and analytics officer in his first week at Best Buy, hot from McDonald's, and just wrote a story in Forbes about what McDonald's is doing from a data and analytics perspective featuring Craig. So the next story will be about Best Buy. Also delighted to have Ajai Sehgal from Mayo Clinic, Chief Data and Analytics Officer, and actually Tom Davenport and I will have an article coming out in MIT Sloan Management Review on August 6th or 7th about what Mayo Clinic is doing from an AI and analytics perspective. And then delighted to have Dwayne Griffin, Chief Data Officer from State Farm. So delighted to have you, Dwayne. And Grace Lee, Chief Data and Analytics Officer from Scotiabank. Before we start the questioning, I'm just going to share a little bit of data with you because this event's all about data, so why not share a little data? There's an annual survey that we conduct of senior data executives, chief data officers, chief analytics officers, and C executives from Fortune 1000 companies, and have been conducting this for 10 years. And in the introduction or the foreword to this year's survey, Tom Davenport and I write about the evolution of the CDO role and the fact that 10 years ago, only 12% of the organizations that we surveyed had a chief data officer, and now it's roughly 76%. And the role is becoming progressively more established within organizations. I'm sure you can't read this, but there's 94 blue chip organizations that participate in the survey each year across a range of industries, and they range from ExxonMobil to McDonald's to Starbucks to the major financial services firms and the major healthcare firms. So some data that you can read. I mentioned the breakdown. There's historically been a heavy concentration on financial services because financial services are so data rich and have been at it for many decades. More recently, healthcare and life sciences firms have been participating more actively, as well as some other industries. And as noted, 77% of the respondents this year hold the title of Chief Data Officer or Chief Data and Analytics Officer. So some of the findings which are interesting and provocative. One of the things that we ask each of the survey participants, we ask them 5 questions. We say, are you driving innovation with data in your business? Just over half said yes. We asked, are you competing on data and analytics? Less than half said yes. The rest said no. Are you managing data as a business asset? 39.7% said yes, roughly 60% said they aren't yet. Have you created a data-driven organization? Only 26.5% said they had, and the rest said they hadn't. And have you established a data culture? Only 19.3% said they had, and roughly 80% said they hadn't. We also asked what is the biggest challenge to becoming data-driven, and almost across the board, executives cited cultural factors, change, people, process, and it wasn't about technology. There's plenty of good technology. We also asked about the tenure of the chief data officer role. So as mentioned, when we first conducted the survey, only 12% of firms had appointed a chief data officer, and by this year, 73.7% had. We also asked who has primary responsibility for data within your organization, and it's crept up in terms of the CDAO having responsibility with roughly half, but what's still interesting is that roughly a quarter or just under a quarter of organizations still say that there's no single point of accountability for data within their organizations. And then just some, I'll wrap up with a few other questions. We asked about the profile of a successful chief data officer. Roughly half said it was somebody who comes in external to an organization and is a change agent, brings that outsider perspective. A few years ago, a majority or near majority of respondents said that it was a company veteran or insider, but that has dropped substantially. We also asked what the primary focus of the CDO role. Was it offensive in terms of revenue generation, growth, and innovation, or was it defense in terms of regulatory compliance? And there's been a significant shift in recent years to the more offensive role, particularly with the integration of the analytics function into the CDAO function. And then we also asked about the primary skill sets associated with the CDO leadership, and see that data analytics and data science are key components. And then lastly, we asked two questions. We asked about the tenure and stability. A majority of organizations said they only had one CDO, but a significant number also said that they had multiple CDOs, roughly 43%, and know from firsthand experience that some of the major banks that have been at this for a long time are on their 5th, 6th, or even 7th iteration of an individual in the Chief Data Officer role. And lastly, we asked whether this role is successful and established within your organization, and 40% said it wasn't, and 40% said it was, and 60% said it wasn't. And Tom Davenport and I wrote last summer in Harvard Business Review about the short tenure of the Chief Data Officer, and one of the points we stated was that the average tenure of the CDO is between two and 2.5 years, and few CDOs have been in the role for more than 3 years. So it'll be interesting in terms of our panelists today, what their experience has been in that context. So we'll begin with our first question, and would like to understand how each of you personally came to assume the Chief Data Officer role at your company, and we'll rotate, but we'll start with Craig and move to Craig's left.
Good afternoon, everybody. First, I'd just like to say it's great to see all of you in person. I've been waiting for some in-person events, so really excited to be here. You know, I'm on day 8 at Best Buy, so it's an interesting transition, and I'll say I'm pulling Randy's curve down a little bit with the average on the most recent move too, so I can't tell you I don't have any experience in this space. But actually, in the cases of my prior moves from McDonald's to Best Buy, and from Ford to McDonald's, and McKesson before that, and Caterpillar before that, in all those cases, actually, folks reached out to me and found me before I found them, and brought to me compelling opportunities about ways to expand and transform the business with data and analytics. And so quite often it's been an active pull from my experience, which I think some of the data shows too, is, you know, where are people pulling their CDOs from? They're pulling them from other companies quite often, as that expansion goes with the number of roles that are out there.
Excellent. Ajai?
Good afternoon, everybody. Pleasure being here. So my tenure at Mayo Clinic has only been about 1.5 years, and that's primarily because I am the first CDAO that Mayo Clinic has had. Prior to this, data and analytics resided in a number of organizations, primarily with shared services, but partially under the CIO as well. I have owned data and analytics in some way in almost every commercial company I've been in, but it's been more in the role of CIO or CTO. And I got to Mayo Clinic after retiring in September 2020 from my last private equity gig. And I got a call from Mayo Clinic saying, hey, we're establishing a CDAO role. Are you interested? And I think if it had been anyone else, I would have said, no, I'm really going to retire. But for Mayo Clinic, an organization that does so much good in the world and delivers medicine in a manner that is quite unique, I had to say yes, and I'm glad I did, because the opportunity there is absolutely amazing. But they pulled me primarily for my technical ability.
Great, thank you. Dwayne.
Awesome. Well, good afternoon. I kind of echo my fellow panelists. Randy, thanks for letting me add to your fabulous panels you have every year. This is a great session, and to be part of it with this group is amazing. So I was appointed CDO of State Farm in January of 2021. So I know you'll notice, well, maybe not a couple days. He's just messing all the trends up down there. But about 18 months into assignment, I'm a 21-year employee with State Farm. So my journey really to this position has kind of been founded through the technology organization. You look at Randy's stats. I guess I'm a statistical anomaly. I'm an insider, and I grew up in technology. So go figure. But really the things I think that have really prepared me for this assignment and role, I've led maybe the past 5 years our data engineering function. So I've sat very close to this. I'm the second version of this for us at State Farm. We actually did do a CDAO initially, and the structure for that was on the business side under our CFO. I report in through technology in a dual reporting nature with our CIO and our Chief Digital Officer. So some intentionality around that. And I echo much what Ajai said. I work for a great organization. We're celebrating 100 years, and it's an honor to really reside the responsibility of data for an organization that's in the business of doing good with great brand, but in a manner in which we do that. So I'm excited to dive deeper on that.
Welcome. Grace.
Oh, well, hi, everyone. I think to continue the trend, I've been with the bank for about 16 months. Nobody's counting, but 16 months. And I'm actually a very non-traditional Chief Data and Analytics Officer, so I'm a closeted former consultant. And I actually worked with the bank for about 8 years before joining them. I got a call in January of 2021, and it just seemed like an amazing opportunity to join a company that I loved working with and actually work for it. But historically, I've always been in applied analytics, so always using analytics, being a consumer of data, sometimes a frustrated consumer of data, but a consumer nonetheless. And being able to take that experience of being on the other side of the equation is something that I think Scotiabank as an organization has learned over the last couple of years. Like many other organizations that are getting into data and analytics for the first time, the first instinct is to find the very best data person, the very best analytics person, the person who's been in the industry for 30, 40 years to really shape the vision. And that's a natural instinct, but what it misses is that ability to bridge into application, the ability to have it touch customers and employees, deal with broken processes, deal with heavy governance, bad process, and ultimately integrate more effectively into the way the business actually runs as opposed to the way that it should run. And that transformation, I think, was challenging for us for a couple of years. And I think maybe the signal of hiring me as opposed to somebody who's a perhaps more logical candidate for the role was a recognition that the application, the integration with the business, the bridging of and translation of some of these concepts into things that can make it into reality. We'll see how it goes, but 16 months in, I'm having a great time.
So it sounds like the longest tenure in this panel is around a year or so?
Year and a half.
Year and a half.
Yeah.
All right.
We got you.
I have the longest tenure. Who knew?
So Grace, you spoke about this a little bit in your comments, and we'll work back this way. But in terms of your responsibilities as the Chief Data Officer, what really is the function or your primary mandate from your vantage point?
Yeah, so I really love, I think 3 out of 4 of us are Chief Data and Analytics Officers. And I think that this combination is actually a really good direction that the industry is taking, because it marries a lot of the things that you would have asked in your survey, Randy, around, is it offense or defense? And anybody who's ever played sports knows that it's both. So I think in our history, the role of the CDO or the CDAO is a lot more around protecting and managing the assets that we have. And as a bank, we're super fortunate. We have so much data, and we're regulated to have a ton of data. So it's actually been a really great responsibility and a huge responsibility to manage the data that we already have. But I think that there is also, there's a very important role to play for the data leadership in an organization, whether it be the Chief Data Officer or otherwise, to help create more data. Because that information is so important to the way that we understand our customers, especially in head office. You don't spend any time with them. How can you possibly know how your business is doing or how your customers are feeling or how your employees are supported unless you have free-flowing data? So just like banks are responsible for the free flow of money, I would say that this job is very similar to the CFO in that it's responsible for creating the free flow of information across the organization, making sure that it's accessible, making sure that it's safe, it's used ethically, and it's well protected.
Excellent. Dwayne?
Yeah, so I think really building on, I think that connectivity, a lot of my anchor responsibility starts with that vision. I mean, I think we know many of our roles, even in the newer nature of them, has a lot of vision, strategic focus as that anchor point. Where does my organization and in the business in which we're in for our customers, what are we focused on? And how do we drive that? So I would say the anchor point of really my responsibility and focus is on that strategy and that focus of it, and then building on those foundational blocks of governance, management, architecture, and how those pieces then begin to kind of start to connect it in. You know, a lot of it, what it means for us at State Farm, what I love about working for State Farm, and it's interesting when you talk about data topics, whether you think about insurance as an industry or even the financial industry as others, you know, I would say data's always been a product of what we've been in the business and doing. And we're celebrating 100 years of being in existence as a company. But it's different to be data-driven in 2022 than in 1922. And I think the nature of that is on what your strategic focus is around that. And for me, it's kind of anchored in 3 areas for our organization. It's around customer, the orientation around the customer and what those experiences of the customers are. How does that then advance the sharing aspects? Grace hit on that. The flowing of data, just this concept. We can think of money flowing through our organization, and it does, and it has accountability to it. But when we think about the flow of data, we talk about it being manufactured, and then those data sources. We know there's tons of untapped internal and external data sources that will help that customer orientation. So that kind of is the anchor points of where my responsibilities and focus really hit on it.
Excellent. And Ajai, your perspective, and it's interesting because all 4 of the panelists represent, you know, very different industry segments.
Yeah, so healthcare by its nature is very, very data-driven. Mayo Clinic has been data-driven from the beginning. I mean, it's funny that you mentioned 1922. I'll tell you a little story. There was an engineer physician at Mayo Clinic by the name of Dr. Henry Plummer. He's the one who really invented the first unified medical record. And back then, he insisted that doctors at Mayo Clinic only use Mayo Clinic pens with Mayo Clinic blessed ink and only wrote on Mayo Clinic paper. And he did extensive studies of writing on paper, taking the paper, putting it on the top of the building, letting it go through the weather, let its sun fade to make sure that it's truly archival. So if you go back and you look in our museum, you'll see this great picture of the Mayo brothers with Franklin Roosevelt. All 3 signed this picture of them in a car. The president's signature has faded and is almost not there, whereas the Mayo brothers' signature, signed with Mayo pens, looks like it was signed yesterday. And that's true of our medical records going back to 1920. I can pull a medical record from 1920 and read it as if it was written yesterday. We can OCR it, we can interpret it. So Mayo Clinic has this long history of being data-driven. My responsibility is not to centralize data. It is not to centralize analytics, and it's not to centralize data governance. My responsibility is to enable all 3 of those throughout the organization. Analytics needs to be done at the source. Data needs to be generated and governed at the source. So what we're trying to do is bring a little bit of order to what had evolved from a very highly organized system back in the days of Dr. Plummer to a little bit of a chaos with many siloed systems segregated throughout the hospital, it being difficult for research to find data because it was not properly cataloged. Data governance was a term, and that's all it was. Now what we're doing is we're bringing in the formal processes and enabling data governance throughout the organization, creating stewardship teams throughout the organization, and really trying to bring a culture of data into the hospital. Everybody in the hospital recognizes that they run on data. Everyone from our research shield, education shield, to our practice. They need access to data, they need easy access to data. And that's what my job is to enable that.
Great, thank you. Craig?
You know, it's an interesting combination because when I think about what I've heard from the other panelists, it sums up my role pretty well, but let me articulate it just slightly differently. Our focus is on how do we enable the business, and my mandate, my role inside of Best Buy is really to how do I superpower that waterfront. And so my span across that waterfront is customer area. You know, how do we enable people's lives with technology? How do we do the things that Best Buy does with providing new products and capabilities to enable people's lives with technology? There's a huge opportunity for us, not only in the store side, but also in a customer's home. We've seen some of that take place with the advent of COVID. People want more technology in their home. They have more technology in their home. do they have the opportunity to optimize it? Is there ways that we can help customers in a new way and enable them with technology? In addition to that waterfront, we have the stores. We have a focus on the store footprint and operations, and I have a big focus on how do we create a new store experience, leverage these assets, do it in the right way, and do it in a sustainable fashion for the environment as well. And then we also have the supply chain, and a big portion of that is supply chain and optimization as well. What you'll see, we also have the responsibility for raising the capabilities of HR, finance, IT, you name it, all parts of the organization to raise their capabilities with data and analytics. And so that brings us into a couple of areas that I mentioned as the focus of strong data sciences and data science capabilities, strong decision sciences groups that are very closely aligned with the business to be making edge decisions on a daily basis. But also this piece, what I call is evangelitics, is a big part of my role too, is showing the organization what is possible, looking outside the company and bringing new ideas in, and helping them transform with data as a bedrock, but what's possible and what capabilities and skills do they need to set them free as well. So building a very strong data analytics organization, of course, but also enabling the entire organization to move forward with the capabilities that they can do themselves at the edge.
So this follow-up question's for you, Craig, and anybody should feel free to weigh in. I speak with so many organizations, and they talk about the difficulty in deriving business value or business outcomes from their data investments. So the question to you, which you kind of touched upon, is how do you ensure that you are delivering business value to the organization from your data investments?
Yeah, and there's many facets to this. The first one is obviously you have to measure it. What is that measurable qualitative or quantitative outcome that you're looking for? What's the problem you're trying to solve? What is the central question that you're going for? And I think there's a big opportunity for us in the data sciences and the data disciplines to really be embracing the concepts of human-centered design. So that's one big piece of it. The other big piece of it that I've seen in the last two roles, honestly, and I'll use an analogy and hopefully it doesn't get too lost. In hockey, there's a famous statement from Wayne Gretzky is, I don't skate where the puck is, I'm going to skate where it's going to be, which a lot of people use as a predictive and where are we moving. I have a corollary to that, is that assumes you know where the puck is right now. And my humor in that is that you have to meet the business where they are today. A lot of times in this evangelist role or showing what's possible, we're trying to leapfrog over and show them 3 steps from now where they can be. We need to take the business with us on these journeys and opportunity, meet them with their current challenges and opportunities right now, and start to work them through. Because there's a lot of immediate value in some of the more rudimentary, nuts and bolts, meat and potato analytics work that we can do, especially in the data space, that frees up our opportunity and opens up the aperture for us to do more things with some advanced machine learning and AI. And so I find it really important to first map where those customers are so you can be showing value very quickly and start to create that flywheel of future opportunities as well. And too often I see as practitioners, we want to show them this future state, but not actually take them on the journey with us.
You know, as a CDAO, as the first CDAO, there's no way that I'm going to be successful if I spend the first 2 years building the foundation to build on the analytics. The business, in our case, it would be the practice shield. That's the business. That's the revenue generator. I have to address their needs up front. So what we did at Mayo Clinic is we started to treat data as a product. So one of the complaints that I got from a physician that was interviewing me for this role, he said, look, I'm trying to get some information to help my patients, and I put the request into IT, and 12 weeks to 14 weeks later, I get my answer back in a chart, and I don't need it anymore. And that's the problem that they wanted us to solve, and that's why they wanted to bring in a CDAO. So what we've done at Mayo Clinic is we've created a prioritization list that is prioritized by the practice, so the physicians themselves have prioritized the business value. Then what we've done is cherry-picked those that we can deliver the fastest on. And we are starting to deliver value right away while we're building the foundation. We may not be delivering those in the ideal fashion, but we are generating value and getting recognition. I love evangelistics.
Evangelistics.
I'm going to borrow that term because that's exactly what you have to do with the business. You got to satisfy the business requirement quickly because they're impatient. They've been suffering a long time, and that's part of the job.
Yeah, and I don't want to keep round, so I'm going to let Grace go to, we can break the pattern and let her go, and I'll follow back up if you want to.
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, I think there's a level of humility that we all need to adopt. So many people hear about analytics and data and think it's some alien abstract concept that I sucked at math, so I'll never be good at it. And it's really not true. It's something that we all need to embrace, and it's very easy to do so if you take away AI and just make it about good information and good insights. So when we go to the business, it's not from AI to BI. We will help serve your need, and it does not need to be the most sophisticated way of solving the problem for it to be a very useful one. And that culture, I think, has helped to turn it from an alien concept into something that's absorbable and that people can feel is a part of the way that they do business, which ultimately changes the culture. But the way that we've been thinking about it is very similar to the way that my other panelists have described it, which is, we always want exponential change, and that foundation will allow that to happen, but it takes a really long time for that hockey stick to move. So we operate off of two curves. So a linear one where our input equals our output, and that's very suboptimal, but it actually does show incremental improvement over time, linked with foundational investments at the same time that allow us to earn our way into all of the investments that are required. And ultimately, probably 2 to 3 years in, if I'm using my own organization as an example, those two curves meet. And then you can hop one curve into the next one, and the entire organization is much more ready for the amount of change that they're about to experience. So I think that humility, the ability to meet the business where they are, and then travel with them to where the puck is going is probably the best answer for sustainability.
And I mean, I really think my fellow panelists hit it well. I think value is delivered through business outcome. There's no question about that. There are needs of the business that are real, that happen every day, that the value has to be produced through. But to achieve the value, there's an investment portion that happens horizontally across organizations that then hits this curve that then meets that need. And what you're, in the analogy of the Wayne Gretzky quote, you're trying to invest ahead of the curve so that when the need is there, you can then achieve that. So I really think value is delivering with those right outcomes in alignment. You got to have the understanding and the pulse of what are the needs of the business, what are those problem statements, and you do have to be ahead of the curve in the data space. That's one of our most complicating challenges, is that the role is enabled across so many parts of the organization. You have your IT functions, you have your business functions that have to kind of be aligned into what they're trying to achieve. And if no one's trying to score a goal, guess what? You're not going to score a goal. The outcome is let's score a goal, but then let's invest in those right things that position us to be where the puck is going to be at. So you got to do, there's a lot in there, but I think that's ultimately where the value is delivered. And that's what you focus on.
And following up on that question, and this is a provocative question, but why do you believe that so many companies have struggled to make the chief data officer role successful? Anybody want to jump in on that?
I'll jump on this one. I think there's a couple main factors that get out. First is it's unclear expectations. I think many organizations just jump at the excitement of, well, it seems like everybody else. I read my Wall Street Journal today, and another company announced a new chief data officer or new chief data analytic officer, and there's not really clear expectations into what's the desired delivery or value to be created from that role. So I think that's the first point. I think the second is understanding from those lack of expectations where value is really delivered at through the role. So if you're in a position, let's say you are 8 days on a job or 2 weeks, and you find yourself in this new role, it's going to be very important as quickly as you can to galvanize what the expectations are and what success will be. Because you can get caught into a 5-year success journey, or you can get caught into, here's how I deliver value in the next 12 months. And I think that's ultimately one of the things to be shaped out, and it looks different for each organization because of either how they set that up, how it's positioned, what it's focused on, and I think that's how you start to tackle down where those challenges come together.
Yeah, you know, somebody had asked me the other day, they said, what do you see as one of the failings of new chief data officers? And I said, they say yes to too many things to too many people. And I said, maybe they should just say no to everything. I don't know, but that's, sometimes you have to manage those expectations pretty aggressively. Would anybody else like to weigh in on
I think there needs to be a realization that when you carve off a CDO or CDAO role for the first time, you're carving off an area of responsibility from someone else. In many cases, it's the CIO. And if that relationship is not built upon and patched early in the tenure of the CDAO, you're going to have an adversary out there for the rest of your career. And I think that building that relationship and agreeing upon areas of responsibility between IT and the CDAO organization is vitally important. In the case of Mayo Clinic, my data engineers reside in IT. So the CDAO organization, if you can think of it as the product organization for product and engineering organization. And building that relationship and getting the support of the CIO has been absolutely essential to our success.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, the way that I constantly talk about this flywheel, because technology is the only thing that creates data. Data is the only thing that allows us to build models. And models don't have any use. It's an empty brain in a jar until it's reintegrated into technology, into process, into the ways that people actually interact with customers. So unless all three of those areas, not just data and analytics, but technology, to your point, are on the same page, have shared goals, have shared objectives, shared incentives, and a common vision, it's impossible for that flywheel to be activated. There's always some grit in the gears that prevents us, the organization from being successful. And I think what perhaps the major failing has been just organizationally is that we don't understand how existential data is yet. So when people are brought in for data and analytics roles or chief data and analytics roles, it's always around a project. It's 2 to 3 years, solve this data governance issue. We've got audited, the regulators after us. And it's not, this is the way that we do business now. And so you find that, and I've been asked this question a couple of times. So when do we not have to use you anymore? When can it be reintegrated into the business? Or when do we not need this group of people that you have at the center? Nobody wants to centralize, but certainly to get scale and to provide that level of catalyst at the beginning of a transformation, you do need a little bit of bulk. And it just comes from a fundamental misunderstanding about the fact that data is just a digital representation of reality. And until we get there, and until we understand that the business runs on it, I think we are going to be consistently challenged with the project-based mindset around this role.
Yeah, I think part two, Randy, is there needs to be recognition when a CDAO comes in, when the position is established, that what you're trying to achieve is not only a technology change, it's a cultural change. And I know your survey highlighted that fact, but it is so true. Because in the absence of the organization, the way you got priority for data and analytics was based on who you knew. Informal chains of command throughout the organization. When you put some formal structure into delivery and you're prioritizing and you have an intake for delivery, you're changing the way the organization operates. And there needs to be evangelism of that, there needs to be education, there needs to be data literacy, all of that, the soft skills and empathy, right? All of that has to go into the role. And if you don't do that, if you come in with an authoritarian type perspective, that role is going to fail because you go up against culture and you're going to lose against culture every day.
Culture is not motivated to change.
Correct.
Right. At the end of the day, we know the famous quote, but it's really hard to change culture and authoritatively in our environment with so much empowerment within the engineers, the scientists, within the leaders themselves. you have to rally around those right points that supports the change for the good of the organization. That's I think the anchor point for that one.
And just one point, it's interesting to note that a lot of the data or digitally native organizations like a Amazon or a Facebook or a Google, or even in financial services, a bank like Capital One, they don't currently have chief data officers because they view it as everybody's job, and that's very much inculcated into their business culture. Craig, did you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, just a couple of points to add. I think really insightful comments. The one piece to look at is in the span of corporate organizations and responsibility structures, this is a fairly new role, right? It's not, don't compare it to the tenure of a CFO or even a CIO. Those roles have been around chief supply chain officer for a long time. It's not completely surprising to see this type of turnover and rotation. When CIOs first came out, I think the average tenure was just as short, and now that's actually lengthening. If you take a look at cyber when they first came in, although I'd say that their mandate was much more specific than the role of the CDO, keep the bad guys out. When you take a look at sustainability officers and other new and emerging roles that are a little less well-defined as described earlier, you see this misalignment of expectations of what, say, corporate boards or C-level executives are looking for in these roles. So I do agree with that. The second piece is, and we've sort of said it indirectly, it's a hard job. It's a hard role. Give me immediate benefits, behave me a way to change the company and the culture for a sustained future, do it on a budget that varies with my business performance, go after these high-tech talent folks and retain them to get sustainability. And I also want you to be an expert in data, an expert in leading change, understand the scientific method in and out so you know what P's and T's and scores are, and walk in and out and be able to explain that to someone in supply chain who speaks acronyms from this dictionary, to the same to the customer people who speak acronyms in another dictionary. It's a hard job. Yeah. The question is setting those expectations up front, because I think your next question, how do you start to change that, is get real clarity on what is it you're solving for and where you're trying to go with that executive team that you're part of. What are those outcomes? And as an example, I already know my metrics at Best Buy, and I know my metrics at the last company. And neither of them were about the % clean data, or the volume of clean data, or the number of CDEs documented in the customer database. None of them were. They're all about outcomes. They're all about business outcomes. And so what I've seen us pivot to in these CDO roles, and a little bit of I'd say the rebooting that's taking place in some organizations, is a focus of how can you as a CDO help drive these business outcomes. And I think that's a good thing for the practice and for our discipline as well. We still have to be technologists. We still have to speak geek every day. But we have to be tremendous translators in understanding the business and its opportunities. And that's causing our teams to have to pivot and do some things very differently than they've done before. As an example, at McDonald's, every one of my people worked in a restaurant. That's not necessarily a standard learning plan for a data scientist to go flip burgers. But they needed to know the business and understand what they were doing and how it impacted store operations in order for them to be successful at the models that they were building. And I think what you're seeing now is a movement of CDOs to be pushing more into the business, to the edge, as you said, to understand what's taking place, and a little bit lighter on the discretionary time of going, make your model just that much better. Go spend that discretionary time with your business, and that's what I'm seeing.
That's actually an interesting perspective, that partnership with the business. At Mayo Clinic, every single technology leader and every single administrative leader is paired in a dyad with a physician. So my dyad partner is Dr. DJ Kaur. He's an anesthesiologist. My boss's dyad partner is a world-famous urological surgeon. And they help give the business perspective and help you walk the business. And it's a priceless gift to have Dr. Kaur there to consult with.
And to the point, sometimes we lose sight that not only is it a difficult role, but it is a new role. And to Craig's point, 30 years ago, CIO, there was such a flux in that role that the joke was that CIO stood for career is over. So, given
Now it
that
stands for career done.
given that the topic of this discussion is extending the CDO tenure, maybe each of you could weigh in on, given that the average CDO tenure is 2.5 years, how can CDOs extend their tenure, assuming that that's a good thing?
Yeah, and I'll just echo a little bit of the earlier comments, which is set some real clear expectations of what you're solving for and what you want those outcomes to be with your business partners. You're going to need to build the proverbial airplane as you fly it in these roles. Nothing is always, it's 100% ready for you. But understand where the organization is and where it wants to go. And I'd say stay really close to that too, because it changes. As we're all feeling in the last 4 years, in the last 2 years, your businesses have pivoted. Transformation has taken place. We're all, quote, digital now, but yet your survey says we're less digital than ever, because I think we realized what digital really means. And I think some of us are saying, sure, we're definitely data-oriented, and now we have, well, maybe not so much, because now everything is based on the data. So stay close to the business on that journey as well, because the other piece I think is important for a role as a CDO is to be flexible. That flexibility in those business changes and the reality that we have to adapt to those business changes too, and not just say we built a roadmap and here we go. So to me, that's one piece I see is very, very critical is the flex.
And I mean, I think it starts, Randy. You got, first of all, we got your survey, we got at least 27% more that have to appoint their first CDO or CDAO. So I think we're in this window of first to still happen. And there's certain industries you can kind of start to see where it's happening at certain companies, and certain industries are kind of getting on that. And I think it does build on then when the clarity of that role, I think, happens, I think there becomes a clearer standard or playbook in terms of what the role entails. And I do think it looks different for each organization, their history, their culture, the problem that may bring them in. It may be a project, but then the project evolves into more of an initiative and then to those culture aspects, or it may be the culture pieces that drive it in. But I think there's going to be a clearer playbook of where the entry point is for the role and the responsibilities and expectations, that you'll see more tenured role, more tenure in the role. There are some very senior ones, I should say that. And the challenge we had, which is also probably weighing it down, we didn't call it that. Back when it really started, it wasn't really called the Chief Data Officer, but they did exist. And I know Scotiabank had some pioneers within that, digital, so there was, I think you have that nature too that'll start to statistically pull that up over time.
Part of the reason that the tenure might be short is because, as Craig pointed out, it's a stressful job.
Yeah.
This job really is hard, and to burn out at the end of 2.5 years is probably realistic. I mean, if I look at my health app and if I'm as stressed as it tells me I am, I'll burn out in another 1.5 years. So, but listen, if you want us to be in the role a long time, you got to have a long-term strategic plan with a vision that you can evangelize, but not at the expense of having a tactical plan that allows you to execute and deliver business value now. You need both. If you deliver both and it's well thought out and the business perceives that it's getting value, they're going to be supportive of the organization, and you will get more budget and you will deliver more value.
Yeah, I don't think I could say it much better. I mean, the best way to extend the tenure of the CDO is to stay. I don't think I've seen many CDOs actually be asked to retire or fired from an organization. It's typically because people leave. There's a better opportunity elsewhere, or it's just so difficult to affect change and to feel like you're having an impact, especially when you're leading perhaps alone in a lot of respects. A transformation for Scotiabank celebrated its 190th year this year. Wow. It's a lot of legacy to make up for, and not everybody's very interested in doing it. So I think there's a level of grit. There's probably a degree of understanding that your job is more than functional. If you're doing it for the fun of data or fun of analytics, you might not love the job. If you're doing it because you love the organization, you believe in the change that's necessary, you believe in how much impact, if they did make it, if we could, in 3 to 5 years, pivot this 190-year organization even a few degrees to the left or right, what an impact it would have on the economy, or what it would have for everybody who has stocks in their pensions that are tied to our bank's performance. I mean, that I think is what keeps me going, even when it is incredibly challenging, and you do feel like you're moving backwards sometimes. I think it's really kind of in the spirit of the partnership with the business that we've talked about for the last 50 minutes. I think it's knowing that you are an equal partner in running the bank or running the company, and not a hired gun that's been brought in for your technical expertise per se.
Yeah, totally agree with that. When I get totally stressed out and wonder why I'm still there, I go and I shadow a surgeon in the OR, and I can tell you, it's like watching a SEAL team at work, and the good and the caliber of work that these people do, and what they're contributing to society, that motivates you to put up with the stress, right? And we're here for a reason. We're here for a purpose. It's the mission.
We've got 2 minutes left, and I've been monitoring the questions coming in online, and there's some really, really good questions. And I can tell by the looks on the faces of the audience, there's some really, really good questions in the audience as well. I don't know how we're going to handle any of that, but I just wanted to make you aware.
Yeah, actually, you anticipate, that was my next question, and that is to invite members of the audience, and there's microphones on both sides, to address our panelists with any questions.
Let me get up there with the mic.
Hi, thank you for a great discussion. I would be curious to know what some of your deliverables are, if you can share, and what are some of the KPIs that you as CDO or CDAO are measured on?
Great question, thank you.
Well, I can speak up about a very specific one. I did mention that the role is making data more accessible, ensuring that we're doing so in a safe way. But specifically to enable that, a lot of it is around infrastructure and platforms. We've got, just like many other organizations, we have a concerted effort to move to cloud. Because that solves for so many issues that we've had within the industry for many years, and within the financial services industry, and in Canada in particular, which is typically very conservative. It's been a very hard challenge to get the organization ready for a change like that. So, the way that we're going to accomplish it is by going to cloud, but ultimately, because of the fact that we've been saddled with an on-prem infrastructure that's quite dated, 3,000 jobs per month are canceled because we simply don't have capacity. So I have business objectives very similar to my other panelists. None of my objectives are around CDEs or around cleanliness. It's around how well did you enable the business. So if I can get those 3,000 jobs that are canceled down to 0 jobs that are canceled, and continue to drive revenue and loss prevention and operational efficiency initiatives as an outcome of this cloud transformation. That is what I measured on at the end of the year. One of many things, but that is one of the deliverables that I'm charged with for this year.
Yeah, and I would echo that. I think I do think I have the common KPIs anybody else would have. I think we're all measured to some degree to how we measure cataloging, quality, and other pieces. I have that as part of my responsibility and role. But I also have additional, when you heard me share earlier, what are those outcomes you're kind of rallied around? One of those outcomes are, what's the life cycle of data? What's the time it takes from acquisition, from requests to actual usage? And in delivering that, there's the partner with the engineering organization and other portions that how that's delivered upon. And then what's the effectiveness of stewardship? Not about ownership and the stewardship role and how it makes that accessibility and its usage of how data can flow through the organization. That's actually measured for us. What's the confidence of those stewards? What's their sentiment to feel they know the job, they can do the job in partnership with their technology counterparts who are custodians and their business lead parts. So those are some of the measures in which that rally around how some of those strategic focus points hit certain outcomes for us as an organization.
Can I take a question from the virtual audience? The biggest challenges per global research is more than 80% of the analytical solutions developed through the use cases, though the use cases are prioritized, are not operationalized by the business, and hence value creation is not achieved. How are you ensuring that the solutions are operationalized and value is measured as a BAU?
That's a great question. So I can answer that question and that question in the same breath. I have 4 major areas of deliverables. The usual data governance, data product as a service, self-service analytics, but one of the most important ones is for AI delivery to the practice. How do you take a model that has been developed and is showing promise and do what we call translation, translate it into clinical workflow? And how do you monitor that over time? And how do you characterize the value that it has been delivered? So that's part of my role, is to come up with that process. Everything from software as a medical device, regulatory with the FDA, data characterization so that we understand the equity, diversity, inclusiveness of the data set that was involved. Getting it into clinical workflow, because doctors don't like clicking buttons. They want it to be a natural part of their daily operation. Monitoring algorithms for drift. So we're designing all of those pathways so that it's as easy as possible so we can actually derive value from the analytics that are generated. It doesn't have to be AI, it can be any form of analytics.
Any other?
Yeah, I'd just add, I think the biggest problem is on the ends. I think of a 4-step for everything we do. Take data and information, turn it into insight, turn that insight into an action which generates value or an outcome. Those 4 steps, as data scientists and data professionals, we love the first 2 boxes. We need to focus on the action and the value side. And the way to do that is up front with problem formulation, appreciative inquiry, human-centered design, to really say, what are you solving for? And that'll drive you through to the value side. And the only other piece I'll add to that is don't ever measure deployment, measure adoption. Okay? Don't measure deployment, measure adoption.
And just any other, that's a nice piece of final wisdom. Would anybody else like to convey any final wisdom in our last 3 minutes?
I guess, I'll say in closing again, thanks for the chance to be on a panel. Just look at this room. I don't know how many are online, but it's a really exciting time to be in the data and analytics space. You don't pull a global symposium like this off without that generation of an excitement. I think it's also a notion, I think Craig said it well earlier, it's a really hard job if you're sitting in the CDO or CDAO role. And I think a core part of that are relationships. If we can't form effective relationships with the business partners, the consumers, for me, distribution channel with my agents is really important, as well as our technology partners, then I think this job gets really, really hard, because then it becomes a single throat to choke type application. So what I would leave you with is forge the right relationships. Let those relationships identify the right problems that can set expectations to what success will look like. And no, success is not a once and done, it's probably a delivery. So there's probably milestones to what that success needs to entail and how you may need to approach that. It looks different for all of us, but I think it's founded on relationships, it's founded on outcomes, and it's founded on rallying the organization around those right pieces.
Yeah, be realistic in the promises that are made. You can't say yes to everybody, as Randy's pointed out. That you have to say, there has to be a mixture of yeses and nos. Prioritize the yeses by that which will deliver value the quickest.
Yeah, and maybe as one last comment, as I mentioned before, this is an existential change. Data and analytics is not a side project, very similar to the digital wave that we experienced a decade ago, or even the CIO. It is a different way of operating now. It's massive change. The culture change that needs to come alongside it is not trivial. So I would say be patient with others, but most importantly, be patient with yourselves. If we look at the way that people, other leaders of similar position in some of our companies are measured, and how their success is measured, and what people expect in terms of their transformation of the organization, and you put it up against the CDAO, it's very different. The yardstick is very different for us, and I think probably maybe inappropriately so. So be kind to yourselves. You're making a really big difference, and it's going to be slow, but the impact of it is going to be that much more massive.
Does anyone else see the irony of separating the chief data officer from chief information officer?
Yes, that's interesting. Randy, we're gonna have to wrap because we're out of time. Can we have a round of applause for this great panel? Now, one other. There were, the last count, there were 14 questions inside Whova platform, and I know there's 14 more in the room. Randy, and I did mention I'm the editorial board chair and visionary co-founder of the CDO magazine. I think we need to figure out a way to keep this panel and you together and do an extended interview or a article series or something in the publication, and I can make that commitment. So would you guys like to see something like that? All right, louder. If you really want to see it, louder, please. All right, so you guys are on the hook. Thank you very much. We'll figure that out and watch for it in the magazine.